All right. Hello and good afternoon. My name is Dr. Jason Barker. I'm one of the clinical lab educators here at Vibrant America. And tonight we're going to go over the 4 tests that Vibrant America offers to help you diagnose fungal infections. So this is about a 45-minute long presentation. I'm going to cover a lot. I'm going to speak relatively rapidly, but have no fear. We're going to send a recording of this presentation out to all of the attendees afterwards. And towards the end of the presentation, stick around because we'll be hosting a Q&A as well. So hang tight and let's get into it. Okay, so first off, let's get into some statistics about fungal infections. First thing to know is the cost of these is outlandish. Direct medical costs are estimated about $6.5 to $7.5 billion annually in the United States alone. Indirect costs from premature death, missed work, school, etc., is around $4 billion. Total costs of fungal infections is estimated around $11.5 billion and can be as high as $48 billion, if you can believe that. More than 75,000 hospitalizations and nearly 9 million outpatient visits occur every year due to fungal diseases. And it's estimated about 7,199 deaths occur each year from fungal illnesses. This was from 2021. All these statistics are from the CDC. Go check that out for yourself. It's pretty shocking how much damage these types of illnesses cause. Thereby, good thing we've got these different tests that can help providers like yourselves identify and treat these fungal infections before they get out of control. Okay, so what are some sequelae of systemic fungal infections? Well, mycoses can infiltrate endocrine organs and obviously adversely affect their function, produce multiple metabolic complications. You just think about that endocrine organ, and then you're going to get some dysfunction if that organ is actually infiltrated by that fungus. So think hypopituitarism, hyperthyroidism, hypothyroidism, hypoadrenalism, hypogonadism can affect sex hormones, pancreatitis, kidney and liver imbalances, hyponatremia, hypernatremia, hypercalcemia, so electrolyte imbalances along there. Just really any organ of the body can be affected by these, and it's not like it's just one solitary organ. Clearly, if somebody is infected with a serious fungal illness, it's going to affect more than one organ. And of course, even cancers can be an outcome from fungal infections. Some signs and symptoms. So fungal infections are one of the generally harder illnesses to diagnose because their symptoms are so amorphous and can be vague and widespread. Just as an example, GI illnesses with funguses can lead to bloating, constipation, gas, pruritus ani, that's anal itching, halitosis. What does this sound like? Sounds like a lot of different things to me too. So of course, in the process of you working with your patients and your clients, you're going to be moving down a diagnostic pathway, and then you end up diagnosing a fungal infection if all other paths lead to no outcome. Dermatological, acne, dandruff, urticaria, hives, of course, nail discoloration. That's probably one of the primarily easiest signs of an fungal infection to diagnose. Neurological system, neuropathy, anxiety, fatigue, mood swings, brain fog, you name it. Fungal illnesses can cause this. Of course, we're all familiar with that immense, very intense fatigue that people can get with systemic candidiasis, as an example. Hormonal issues, we just kind of covered that a little bit, but really no hormonal imbalance is, any hormonal imbalance can happen with a fungal infection. So keep an eye on that as well in your differential. Now, this is, I got these statistics or this information from this paper by Hini here on the slide. I would encourage you all to check that out. The reason for that is because it's extremely eye-opening. It was to me too when I was doing some research on this project. Numerous cancers are associated and even caused by various different types of fungal agents. So Candida, Aspergillus, Fusarium, Penicillium, Blastomyces, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is only a small list of the fungal illnesses that can lead to several different types of cancer. Pretty eye-opening. Definitely go check that paper out. It might change your perspective on how we can help prevent and maybe short circuit some of these developments of some of these cancers going forward. Okay, so real quick though, cutaneous fungal infections are probably the easiest to diagnose. Might not even need excess lab testing for these. Thrush is of course candidiasis and oropharynx, very easy to see. That kind of white cottage cheese type substance in the throat. Vaginal candidiasis is also extremely common after a woman's been prescribed antibiotics. Tinea cruris, jock itch. Tinea pedis is athlete's foot. Those, of course, are extremely common as well in the population. Ringworm, of course, not caused by a worm, but caused by a fungus. Onychomycosis is fingernail fungus. Again, pretty easy to spot that one. And trichomycosis is a fungal infection of the hair follicles. And you'll get a lot of hair loss with that, by the way. So if somebody has patchy hair loss, definitely looking at a fungal infection as part of that diagnostic procedure. So just as an example, here's some ringworm on a person's skin, very descript, roundish or kind of worm-like lesions, usually has some central clearing. Hopefully you can see that in this slide. They're obviously red, they can be flaky, very pruritic, can even burn sometimes. Back in the days when I was in a acute care clinic, we would do a potassium hydroxide test on these cutaneous funguses. Just get a little skin scraping, soak it in the potassium hydroxide, and then you can see that potassium hydroxide dissolves all the cutaneous skin cells, and then you're left with the pseudohyphae and the buds and other hyphae from these fungal infections. So fairly easy to spot these ones, but I just kind of like to review those. But let's get into a little bit of terminology first before we go through the rest of the presentation. What is the difference between a fungus versus a yeast versus a mold? Oftentimes these terms are used interchangeably, which is fair, but let's kind of nail it down. So fungi are one of the, I guess it depends on who you read, 5, 6, or 7 kingdoms of living organisms on the planet. I think it was just 5 back when I learned this in college or high school. Nevertheless, fungus is one of those main kingdoms. Fungi can occur as yeast or molds, or a combination of both. So yeast are microscopic fungi consisting of primarily solitary cells that reproduce by budding. So that's one of the things you'll see on that potassium hydroxide slide, or the little tiny buds from the yeast reproducing. And then molds, in contrast, grow in long filaments known as hyphae, which grow by apical extension, which just means they get longer and longer, and then they branch off, kind of like a tree in some senses. Shockingly, this is also very interesting to me, is that 5 to 6 million species of fungus are known, and experts think that there's about 90% are still undiscovered, which kind of blew my mind. And you hear that some places you'll read that fungi are some of the largest living organisms on the planet because they are so widespread, growing in the soil beneath the, beneath what we're typically looking at on the surface. Quick imaging. Here's those little buds and the pseudohyphae. This is probably a Candida preparation on a slide right here. Of course, most people, when they think about a fungus, they think about mushrooms. Mushrooms are, of course, the reproductive organ for a fungus, essentially. So also known as the fruiting body. So this is what we see on the surface, but this patch of mushrooms right here could be very, very extensive underneath the soil. And of course, here is the dreaded black mold, probably some Stachybotrys right here. This is what most of us are kind of used to being very worried about when we see this. And of course, this is what causes some of these very pervasive and serious mold illnesses. Okay, now what if you can't see it? Like I was just talking about, obviously cutaneous fungal infections are fairly easy to spot and diagnose and take care of for the most part. But what if you can't see it? This is why we've got these 4 different tests that can help you along your diagnostic pathway. So tonight we're going to go over these 4 tests in no particular order, but the Candida and IBS profile. Candida, this is Candida antibodies, and the IBS profile is a part of this test, which is helpful in detecting IBS. And I'll go into that test a little bit too, just because it comes as a package. Of course, the mycotoxins, we're looking at mycotoxins in a urine test. So these are chemicals that are produced by spores from mold, which are, of course, extremely toxic. And then the organic acids test, this is a test that is kind of like a emissions test. So we're looking at some compounds that the body produces as a part of metabolism. And then we've got a couple of panels on there that are great at detecting the presence of a fungal overgrowth in the body. And then lastly, we have the gut zoomer. And the gut zoomer is, of course, a stool test, and we can look for the presence of Candida and a handful of other fungi in there. And plus, there's some markers in there as well that can give you clues to a fungal diagnosis. Okay, but let's start with the gut zoomer. So just as I mentioned, this is a GI-specific test. Of course, it looks at many, many different things, but tonight I'm just going to talk about how it can help you diagnose a fungal infection here. First off, though, I want to highlight that Vibrant has done, we do our own validation studies on several of our tests. And for the gut zoomer, this validation study was published back in 2019, just a handful of years ago. And essentially, it was determined that the test had a 95.9% sensitivity and 100% specificity. So throw back to school there. I always need some refreshers on that one too, but essentially sensitivity talks about how good a test is at finding something. So we've got a test designed to look for needles in a haystack. This test is going to find that needle 95.9% of the time. And then specificity refers to how good is this test at actually telling you that it's a needle and not something like a bobby pin or a nail or something that kind of looks a lot like a needle, but actually isn't. So that 100% specificity is extremely noteworthy because when we find that pathogen, we're 100% confident that it is that actual pathogen. Now then, so that being said, because Vibrant is essentially a biotechnology company, we're always working on improving, and enhancing those methods for detection of pathogens. By the way, in the gut zoomer, we are using real-time PCR. So we're looking for genetic material of the pathogens. We're not doing, a visual stain, which is a visual view of looking at are they actually there. We're running PCR, which is a much more accurate way of finding those pathogens. So a couple different ways we do that. Mechanical agitation. The sample is just vigorously shook by a machine to help break down that cell membrane. We also use chemical lysis. So there's certain chemicals that can also help break down those membranes or the biofilms to help us pick up more of that DNA. Also enzymatic breakdown of biofilms, similar but different process, and then thermal lysing. So that's using heat, again, to open up those cells. And of course, the end reason for doing all this is to pick up more of that DNA so we're better able to detect the presence of those pathogens. Okay, so this is a clip from the bottom of the summary page of the gut zoomer. If you have run the gut zoomers before, you're familiar with that summary page. It's the one that has all the phyla listed up at the top, and then the graphs with the patterns of dysbiosis, et cetera, et cetera. But at the bottom, if you actually find a pathogen, you are going to see a panel like this. And here you can see we picked up Candida species. Just a quick note, this is scientific notation right here. So the way I remember to understand this one is 7.7 E3. So that means I'm moving that decimal point over to the right 3 digits. So we've got 7,700 or 7,700 colony forming units of that Candida species in here, when really we want under 100. So that's how you would read that. And of course, we give you a little bit of commentary on how you can, some direction you can go in that treatment. This is just meant as a quick summary. And then other markers that are on the gut zoomer. So, or I'm sorry, got ahead of myself. This is the actual fungi panel. So down towards the bottom of the gut zoomer, that's where we list out all the different pathogens. So the viruses, the bacteria, the fungi, and this is that fungi panel. So if you're curious, which ones are we actually looking for? They're listed over here on the left. So like I said, it's a handful of them. And again, here's that Candida that we picked up, 7,700 colony forming units. So you don't need to dive down all the way to the bottom of the gut zoomer. Of course, any of those positive findings are going to pop up on that summary page. Now, there's some additional markers in the inflammatory panel of the gut zoomer that you can also use to kind of guide you towards a diagnosis of a fungal infection. Now, many of these different inflammatory markers can mean different things. And again, it's just kind of putting different parts of the puzzle together to, again, help you get to that, that diagnosis. But anyway, lysozyme, this is a compound secreted by granulocytes. It's good at breaking down the cell wall. of gram-positive bacteria, but it's also known to be significantly elevated with quite a bit of Candida overgrowth or dysbiotic bacteria. Lysozyme is more specific for inflammation in the colon rather than in the small bowel. So if you have lysozyme on a test, one thing you're thinking is a possible Candida overgrowth. Another marker, matrix metalloproteinase 9, it's listed as MMP9 on the test. This is a marker of inflammation, tissue remodeling, wound healing. So it's a kind of a repair enzyme of sorts, but it is also indicative of mycotoxin exposure. So we will release a lot of MMP9 when we are under assault from a fungus. So keep an eye on that one too. And generally, my experience, this is going to be fairly elevated in the presence of some serious mycotoxin exposure. Now, another marker is beta defensin. So this is an antimicrobial peptide produced by the GI epithelial cells. Beta defensin goes after gram-negative bacteria and Candida. So again, if you've got a handful of these markers on this test, and let's say we didn't actually detect any Candida, which is entirely plausible, there's a lot of different reasons for that I'll go into momentarily. But if you're seeing these markers, you have a high clinical suspicion of fungal overgrowth or Candida infection, then you can run one of the additional tests, such as like the fungal antibodies, and that will also help you pin down that diagnosis. Okay, here is a inflammation panel that is showing us a possible fungal infection, like I was just speaking about. So you can see we've got some beta defensin that's elevated. You've got lysozyme. You've got an MMP9 that's elevated too. It's not greatly elevated, but it is up there. But that combination of those three would make you start thinking about maybe Candida or some other fungal overgrowth going on in the gut. And of course, we've got this calprotectin that's elevated here too. Not enormously elevated, although it's up there. So that would be on par with a fungal infection, very generally speaking. Calprotectin is a highly sensitive marker of inflammation, but it's not very specific either. So good at telling us something's on fire, but not what is causing the fire, so to speak. Okay, so in going over a lot of gut zoomers with a lot of practitioners, one thing I'll hear people say is like, I never see Candida on this test. And there's a handful of reasons for that. One is that, despite our advanced technology and all we do to try to break up the biofilms, et cetera, sometimes things can still be very, very well established in those biofilms, which would, interfere with our ability to pick up the DNA from that thing. Candida can be localized outside of the GI tract too. So entirely plausible that somebody can have Candida infection anywhere in the body and not showing up in the gut. Candida can be below detectable limits to be considered pathogenic too. So we may pick up, say, 98 colony forming units. We're not going to report that as significant because remember the cutoff is under 100 colony forming units, although that could be enough to maybe be making your patient sick. That's very possible. And then last thing, which is probably the most relevant, is specificity of testing again. So in my own personal practice, I've used several different GI labs. One of them in particular, I kept seeing Candida on every single lab that came back, and I got to kind of wondering why. And turns out they did not have any validation studies on that particular test. So specificity was probably low. They were probably detecting something that looked like Candida. So this is kind of like me thinking that your cousin is you or a distant relative is you. So I'm mistaking something similar for you, but it really isn't. So that's kind of why that specificity is super important to know what that is. Okay, that is how you can find Candida primarily, and maybe some other fungal infections on the gut zoomer. Now, next test, this is probably one of the most specific ones we have for detecting some Candida and a couple of other fungal infections, and that's the Candida and IBS profile. Now, this test was renamed in the new year. This was referred to as fungal antibodies. So if you ran that test last year and you're looking for it this year, it's been renamed into this Candida and IBS profile. So looking at antibodies, so it's an indirect test looking for the immune system's reaction against Candida. Now, this is a list of everything we're looking at. Candida albicans enolase is present in Candida biofilms, and it probably plays a role in helping colonization of cells that Candida is next to. So it helps break down cell walls, we think, theoretically, and helps that spread. But these are the different forms of Candida that we're looking for. We're also looking for Saccharomyces cerevisiae, also known as baker's yeast. So baker's yeast is very common opportunistic pathogen in humans. We all can have it on board. Doesn't make most of us sick, but if somebody's immunosuppressed or has other things going on, then they can certainly have an overgrowth of Saccharomyces cerevisiae. And then we also look for Cladosporium or herbarium. So this is a multiplex assay just designed to provide a high level of detection of those antibodies in serum, by the way. Now, this is what a sample report looks like. So very familiar to many of Vibrant's other tests. We're looking at two different sets of antibodies here. We're looking at IgG and IgA as a combination. When one is elevated, almost assuredly the other is elevated. So that's why we do report those together. And then we're looking at IgM. And of course, IgM is an acute antibody. So if you've got IgMs on this test, this person is probably sick with that that overgrowth right now. Whereas if you see IgGs elevated, they've been exposed to it in the past, or they may have an ongoing battle going on with that. And that all kind of depends on how high exactly is the antibody. And of course, we're reporting either in control, which is typically under 10, moderates are 10 or 10.1 up to 20. Those are reported in yellow. And then reds are going to be anything higher than 20.1. So again, this is kind of functional medicine speak, and you'll hear us talk about this on other antibody tests that we run. But if you've got a couple of moderate IgGs, more than likely this is an older infection, probably not contributing to that person's clinical symptoms. Whereas if you've got a lot of red on this test and it's extremely high, that tells me that the immune system is still paying quite a bit of attention to that fungus. And so therefore, again, going to increase my clinical suspicion and probably make me go after treating that. All right. So real quick, different species and different sites of infection. Of course, GI tract, very common, skin, GU. Those are the most common areas where some of these are where they can find a nice home. This Candida lecitanae can be in the bloodstream. That's an emerging, fairly dangerous form of, particularly dangerous form of Candida. So just quick, long story short, you can get these infections basically anywhere in the body. Hence, that's why we're doing that antibody test. It's going to show the presence of that infection. All right. And then as an aside, whenever you run an antibody test at Vibrant, you do have the option for this complementary add-on of the total immunoglobulins. We offer this, and this is basically like kind of a quick safety check, so to speak, of the immune system. So if you run this on somebody and they seem to have adequate levels of the different immunoglobulins, then we know, generally speaking, that their immune system is doing its job. Now, let's say you ran this and several of these antibodies were low, and their test maybe came back with a bunch of moderate antibody levels for that Candida. You might think like, hey, their immune system really could be doing a better job on this. Maybe it's not able to mount an adequate response, and therefore not recording those antibodies at a high level. So do you keep this in mind? This is all part of that interpretation process. So, and then just quick note on the back end, when you're ordering the test, you have to select the antibody test first. So this is like our tick-borne, and of course the Candida, and there's like food sensitivity test, the food zoomers. Again, it's a complementary add-on. You've got to select the test first, and then you're allowed to check the box for this total immunoglobulins. And if that's not making sense to you, ask your sales rep and they can guide you through that virtually, or we can show you that on a console too. Okay, so then that second part of the Candida test is the IBS Sure. And so we're looking at two different compounds here. We're looking at anti-cytolethal distending toxin antibody, and we're looking at anti-vinculin antibody. So very quickly, whenever you have gastroenteritis or you're infected by something that causes gastroenteritis, very commonly these bacteria will release this cytolethal distending toxin. So it does what it sounds like. It destroys those, destroys the cells in the GI tract. And then when we are exposed to those, we release that antibody to it. So we can pick that up whether you have had a recent GI infection, if you've had a recent gastroenteritis, essentially. So there's that part of it. But what happens when we release antibodies to anti-cytolethal distending toxin, we might also end up creating antibodies to vinculin. Now, vinculin is a protein in the migrating motor complex. It's kind of part of what makes it work. This is what helps drive peristalsis. So there can be some molecular mimicry between cytolethal distending toxin and vinculin, unfortunately. So if somebody gets a serious gastroenteritis, long story short, their immune system might also start reacting against that vinculin. And so there's good correlation between elevations of these antibodies and conditions like SIBO. So very highly correlated. So if you're struggling with somebody, you're not sure if they have IBD or they have IBS or what's going on with their erratic bowel movements, this is a great test to look at for that. So it doesn't really have anything to do with fungal antibodies or fungal infections, but nevertheless, excellent extra tool to have at your disposal. Okay, some indications for this, just a little bit repetitive here, but it helps you identify the pathophysiological reason behind IBS, and you can confirm whether it's IBS-D, diarrhea type, or mixed, or yeah, either one of those with an 89% positive predictive rate. That's the data behind that. And then IBS-D might be associated with SIBO, so you can identify this. Of course, mentioned past exposure to a bacterial toxin, food poisoning, essentially. That's another word for gastroenteritis. Autoimmunity of the intestinal motility system, that's that vinculin that we were talking about. And then that presence of that anti-cytolethal distending toxin antibody has been positively correlated with SIBO diagnosis in the literature. Okay, next test are the organic acids. So again, this is a urine test, and we're looking for those fungal specific markers. There are numerous panels on this test, tell you about energy production, fat metabolization, presence of oxalates, et cetera, but we do have this one specific section that'll help you determine if there's dysbiosis and or fungal overgrowth. So real quick, organic acids are organic molecules with acidic properties. This is a test that tells you a little bit about a lot. I wouldn't use this as a primary diagnostic tool, but this is more, for me in my practice, it's more of an add-on, especially when, as I refer to, maybe somebody's not necessarily following the rules of physiology and I'm really trying to dig deep and figure some things out. I like to use an organic acids test. It helps me uncover and think about different possibilities of what's going on with somebody. Like I said, it's like an emissions test. So it just measures how efficiently the body's utilizing proteins, fats, carbs for energy, growth, repair, maintenance. More often than not, organic acids in the urine reflect our fuel efficiency, so to speak. And then, essentially or originally, the organic acids test was meant to help diagnose inborn errors of metabolism. We do have that panel of amino acids. Those are looking for those inborn errors of metabolism on this test. Most people are going to be very sick if they have that going on. They may not find their way into the practice, but nevertheless, check out the organic acids test. Can tell you a lot about different things going on in the body. But again, here is that yeast and fungal marker panel on the test. So we're looking at a handful of different markers here, and you can fairly easily divide these up into whether this is a fungal infection or if it's Candida. So two different types of infections there. Again, when we're working with you on a consult, we can dive down deeper into each one of these markers and say like, hey, maybe it's X, Y, or Z bacteria, or maybe it's X, Y, or Z fungal infection. So again, this is a great test to use, as a complement to something like the gut zoomer, because then you can see, well, hey, is it these actual bacteria that are causing some of these markers to be elevated on some of the other panels in here? So keep in mind this, the interpretation of elevated organic acids should be done in conjunction with clinical symptoms, medical history, and additional diagnostic assessments. So running those additional tests. Every now and then you'll get an organic acids test that's pretty stark, and then it's like, oh yeah, this person's definitely dealing with some fungal overgrowth or candida or something along those lines. But definitely use it with another test. So let's go into some of those markers. So first one there was citramalic acid, produced by various bacteria, other microbes, but also can be produced by Saccharomyces yeast, Propionibacterium acnes, that's obviously bacteria, and Aspergillus is a different type of fungus. So those are some of the main ones that'll create that citramalic acid. 5-hydroxymethylfluoric acid. This one can be elevated due to fungal species like Aspergillus. Aspergillus can, it's pervasive in the environment, can be in food, can be in the animal, etc. So this one is definitely pretty key for diagnosing an Aspergillus overgrowth or an infection. 3-oxoglutaric acid, associated with dysbiotic bacteria, and namely Candida. So this is a key marker for Candida overgrowth. Next one's furan 2,5-dicarboxylic acid, also Aspergillus, Pleurotus, Penicillium, Saccharomyces, several different fungi and bacteria can produce this one. So that's more of like a mixed marker. Furanocarbonoglycine, particularly associated with Aspergillus as well. Those furan derivatives of Aspergillus specifically. And then tartaric acid. This one is also more indicative of Candida than it is fungus in general. So this is one of those kind of combination markers as well. And then last set of 3 of those, arabinose. High levels of urinary arabinose are associated with Candida overgrowth. So this one's extremely key. Somebody's got Candida in the body, this will be in the several hundreds. Pretty easy to spot that one. Carboxycitric acid. This one is a little bit more of a kind of an amorphous marker, but nevertheless will be elevated with microbe overgrowth, especially yeast and or fungi. And then tricarbolic acid, last one here, commonly with fusarium. That is primarily found in corn, corn-derived products. So you can also catch this or get this from consuming animal meat that has been contaminated with that as well. So you've got 9 markers on the organic acids test that can help point you in the direction, whether you've got dysbiosis, whether you've got a fungus, or you've got Candida. And again, say it again, use this as a complementary test with something like the gut zoomer or maybe the Candida antibodies. Okay, last but not least, the biggie is the mycotoxins test. So this, you can get the mycotoxins test alone. It's most commonly ordered along with the total tox. So we're looking at environmental toxins and others. So either or, and heavy metals, right? So you can order all 3 together or this one alone. We're looking at mycotoxin exposure in the urine. We're using mass spec and liquid chromatography to detect these levels. Now, a few things to consider with mycotoxins. First, we're doing this test. You're detecting mycotoxins in this person's body, but then we've got to figure out where it's coming from. And that's one of the great things about this test, as I'll show you in a moment, is that many of the mycotoxins can be fairly well delineated into whether they are coming from the environment or they're coming from a food source. So in this scary little nugget here, it's estimated about 70% of homes in the US have detectable levels of mold. And I don't know what the specific statistic is for buildings, but I'm going to guess it's very close to that. So it's difficult to escape this stuff. Food supply, think dried, stored food, primarily so grains, cereals, things like corn, dried fruit, coffee, of course. So those are some of generally the main types of foods where you can be exposed to a mycotoxin. Associated symptoms, we need a couple of days to go into mold illness, but generally speaking, fatigue, sleep issues, migraines, exacerbation of autoimmune conditions. Remember, fungal infections can just stomp on your immune system, cause immune suppression in of itself. So many symptoms associated with this. Location of exposure, again, I left out spices, legumes. So again, think of dried food primarily. And then environmental, damp indoor environments, water damaged areas, swamp coolers are big origins of mycotoxins. So remember that mycotoxins are metabolites of mold. So it's not necessarily the mold. I mean, it is the mold that's making you sick, but really it's these toxins coming off of the mold. So real quick, this is a great slide from survivingtoxicmold.com. Mold, it's visible generally, certainly visible under a microscope, but contains a root system and the spores, of course. Not all molds produce mycotoxins. Spores generally are not necessarily toxic, but they can cause serious allergies in people. But mycotoxins, these are non-visible, odorless chemicals released by the spores. So that's what we're looking for. And these are extremely tiny molecules. Okay, back to a few statistics about molds and mycotoxins. So there's about 100,000 different species of molds that we know of. But remember, we said there were millions of fungi. The most toxic molds are Cladosporium, Penicillium, Fusarium, Aspergillus, and Stachybotrys. These molds themselves release several hundred different mycotoxins. The most common are the aflatoxins, ochratoxins, patulin. Think of like apple juice with this one, fumosinins, zearalenone, and novelinol. Got to work on my pronunciation of some of these bigger words. But again, we're not eating food. None of us are really eating moldy bread or moldy grains or things like that. So this isn't like somebody's eating this spoiled food, right? These mycotoxins and molds can exist in very small amounts in these foods, and think coffee's a pretty relatively high area of exposure. Juices, wine, again, lots of different food sources for these things. Just kind of a quick picture too. We get moldy grains. We can consume those moldy grains in this hamburger bun, as an example, or cereal or something like that. The cow consumes the moldy grains. We consume the cow. We get the mycotoxins from the cow. We get the mycotoxins from dairy products even. So they're such small molecules. That's how they become so pervasive in the food chain. And that's how we wind up with these things. Environmental molds, goes without saying, wet, damp areas. Who's been in a bathroom like this before? I think we've all had that unpleasant experience, maybe in our younger college days, something like that. We'd all run these days if we knew what we were being exposed to now. This is a big one. This is my PSA. Clean up. This is a side of a washer, a front-loading washer. This is that ring, or I guess it's the ring around the door. If you have one of these washers, most of us do, you need to clean that thing out after every single wash, leave the door open. This is a huge, area for mold exposure, but underneath carpets, attics, crawl spaces, etc. I think everybody's pretty well aware of that. Dishwasher too. Look in the dishwasher seals also. Okay, so let's look at the report really quickly. Vibrant tests for 29 different mycotoxins. I believe that's the most out of any lab company currently. This is the summary page. So if you've run one of these, you know that we always give you a summary page of everything that is either high or moderate. And then, just listing out each specific mycotoxin. And then as you go down through the test, we've got these very, I love these comments down here. They're excellent in telling you the sources, possible areas of exposure. So if you're unfamiliar with any of these mycotoxins and it's elevated up here, the test is automatically going to be populated with the commentary underneath each one of those. So this, the test report in itself alone is a great resource. One thing that Vibrant does is we look for multiple types of aflatoxins. Most other tests only look for the AM1 aflatoxin, which is found in milk. And actually, it isn't the most toxic one of the aflatoxins either. This AFB1 is extremely dangerous. This is one that we know can cause cancer in the liver, as an example. So, and this is Cows can eat this and gets excreted into the milk, and or it's in the grain. So again, very easy for us to get this stuff in our bodies here. So we're looking at several different aflatoxins, and then we've also got this key is showing you some of the mycotoxins that other labs do not necessarily test for, and then each, we try to group them like we had the aflatoxins, trichothecins, and then the others that don't fit into a specific group. And as an example, last page, trichothecins, some of the most dangerous and toxic molds. A lot of these are produced by the that black toxic mold, Stachybotrys, but the Riordans, Saccharomyces, etc. These are, like I said, very dangerous. Stachybotrys is one of those molds that actually has an odor to it. Not all mold does. People say it smells like cat urine or kind of like ammonia. So if you have an odor like that, then obviously you're going to go looking for where that is. Okay, some quick pearls about mycotoxins. Like I mentioned, 70% of homes have environmental mold in them, probably similar to a lot of buildings as well where we all work. States with the top mold exposure: warm and humid: Florida, Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, California. But that doesn't mean that there isn't mold everywhere else. I'm in Colorado. We get mold here. In fact, we had an extremely wet spring and summer this year, and now everybody's going crazy because this is when the alternaria, it's a type of environmental mold that grows here. Everybody's having really bad allergies because of that. And, we had some major flooding in Boulder last, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Caused a lot of illness in people, and also produced a couple of leading mold experts in the field too. So there's a little silver lining on that. But nevertheless, you can have mold exposure anywhere, right? It doesn't need to be in some humid place. Already spoke about sources of foodborne mycotoxins. Remember, if somebody just has one bit of mycotoxin or mold in their body, that can completely deplete their glutathione stores. So it's not like you need to be infected with several different types of these to be sick. It just takes one. And of course, already talked about how mold can affect any organ, stomps out our immune system, will make things like Lyme disease and co-infections persist. If somebody's got Lyme and or a co-infection, you've got to get rid of the Lyme illness, the mold illness first, before you're really going to make any ground against that Lyme infection. Lastly, as we wrap it up here, we have numerous resources and guides for you regarding all these different tests. We've got a document with specific binding agents for mycotoxins. We've got a mycotoxins lifestyle guide, just ways that people need to be living who are affected by mold illness. Give some supplement recommendations that they can use ongoing. We look at mycotoxins and their associated species, where they're from. We've got a document on that one. We've got a mycotoxins intervention guide. So this is a great way to get started in helping somebody who's dealing with mycotoxins. So just a guide, just a good stepping off point, but nevertheless, very detailed resource for you. Of course, we've got the excellent gut zoomer interpretation guide. I always say this is like an encyclopedia about the gut zoomer. That'll go into much greater detail on some of those different markers and what those different inflammatory markers can pertain to. And then we've got the organic acids interpretive guide that we've all been waiting for. I know is just finished, and it might already be wrapped up. Don't quote me on that, but look for this in your education portal any day now. This is an incredible document, like all of these, but these are all in your provider portal under the education tab. So go on and take a look at those. And of course, if you're ever having a problem finding one of these, please reach out to us. And then of course, when you order these tests, where all of us, the clinical lab consultants, educators, are available for you for a review of these. So please do reach out to us if you have any questions or need any help with any of these. And so that'll wrap it up for right now. just a quick summary, we've got 4 different tests to help you find those, that fungal burden in the body. That Candida IBS profile, that is an antibody test, so that's a blood test. Also going to help you determine what's going on with somebody's GI tract if you're concerned about IBS or SIBO. The mycotoxins is a urine test, looking for, of course, mycotoxins. This is usually part of the total tox, so you can look at heavy metals and environmental toxins too, which I almost pretty much always order all 3 of those together because of so much information in there. Organic acids, urine test, looking at metabolic byproducts of dysbiosis, Clostridia, which is, of course, bacteria, and then also, like we reviewed, those 9 different markers that can point you towards Candida or other fungal infections. And then the gut zoomer, we can straight up detect Candida in the stool and or hints of inflammatory markers that might point towards that. So thank you for watching. And right now we're going to open it up to some Q&A.